Henry VIII, one of the most well-known kings in history, ruled over England from 1509 until his death in 1547. While he is often remembered for his 6 marriages and for creating the Church of England, his death and burial hold their own fascinating story. Despite the grand life he lived, his burial was far from the grand legacy he envisioned. Henry VIII was born in 1491 and became king in 1509 at the age of 17. He is best remembered for his 6 wives, 2 of whom he had executed. His reign is marked by significant events, including the English Reformation, which saw England break away from the authority of the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church. Henry was a man of many contradictions. Early in his reign, he was handsome, athletic, and charismatic. But as time went on, his health deteriorated, and he became increasingly paranoid, tyrannical, and cruel. Much of this change is believed to have been brought on by a jousting accident in 1536, where he was thrown from his horse. The fall severely injured his leg, which never healed properly, leading to infections and chronic pain. This, combined with his already explosive temper, made Henry a feared and unpredictable ruler. By the time Henry reached his 50s, he was plagued by several health issues. He suffered from obesity, with his waist reportedly measuring over 50 inches, and the injury from his jousting accident had left him with an ulcerated leg that caused him immense pain. His mood darkened, and he became more reclusive, spending much of his time in his private chambers. In January 1547, Henry fell gravely ill. His condition worsened rapidly, and he knew that death was near. He was attended by Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and other close advisors in his chambers at Whitehall Palace. It was reported that in his final hours, he expressed remorse for his actions, particularly for the lives he had taken during his reign. On January 28, 1547, Henry VIII passed away at the age of 55. Henry's death was kept a secret for several days. His body remained in Whitehall Palace while plans were made for his funeral. His heart and vital organs were removed and placed in lead caskets, which were buried separately from his body. His body was then embalmed and placed in a wooden coffin. However, before his body could be buried, it was laid in state at Whitehall Palace, surrounded by burning candles. The death of Henry VIII marked the end of an era. His son, Edward VI, just 9 years old at the time, was declared king. But Henry's death was not just the end of his reign, it was also the beginning of a journey for his body, one that would lead to many curious and unsettling events. Henry VIII had always planned for a grand and impressive tomb. He had wanted to be buried in Westminster Abbey, alongside his father, Henry VII, and his mother, Elizabeth of York, in a massive and ornate tomb that would reflect his power and legacy. However, this tomb was never completed during his lifetime. Instead, Henry was placed in a temporary burial vault at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle, a resting place he had chosen because it was where his beloved third wife, Jane Seymour, was buried. Jane had died in 1537, shortly after giving birth to their son, Edward VI. Henry had always expressed his desire to be buried next to Jane, but he also hoped to be moved to a grander tomb later on. Unfortunately, that grand tomb would never come to be. The journey to Windsor Castle was a grand affair. Henry's coffin was placed on a large hearse, pulled by horses draped in black cloth. On top of the coffin was a life-sized wax effigy of Henry, dressed in royal robes and adorned with jewels. This effigy was meant to represent the king and give the public a sense of what he looked like in life. For many people who lined the streets to watch the procession, this would be the closest they would ever get to seeing their monarch. The procession stretched for miles, with hundreds of people, nobles, clergy, and soldiers, following behind the hearse. The roads had to be widened to allow the grand procession to pass through. It was a public spectacle, fitting for a king of Henry's stature. The funeral procession made a stop at Seymour Abbey for the night. It was during this stop that one of the most bizarre and unsettling rumours surrounding Henry's burial began to circulate. According to stories, Henry's body, which had been embalmed, began to decompose rapidly. It is said that the gases inside his body caused his corpse to explode inside the coffin, leading to a foul-smelling liquid leaking out of the wood. In one version of the story, dogs were seen licking up the liquid that had spilled from the coffin. This tale, while gruesome, is not entirely impossible. Decomposition can cause gases to build up inside a body, and if the coffin was not sealed properly, it could lead to an explosion. Whether or not this actually happened remains a mystery, but it adds to the dark and dramatic legacy of Henry VIII's death. The next day, the funeral procession continued its journey to Windsor Castle. Upon arriving at St. George's Chapel, Henry's coffin was carried into the church by 16 guards, a task that required so many men due to the king's large size and the heavy weight of the coffin. The funeral service was conducted with all the ceremony befitting a monarch, and after the service, Henry's coffin was lowered into the vault below the chapel. The vault in which Henry was buried was a small one, originally meant for Jane Seymour. Despite his wishes for a grand tomb, Henry's final resting place was far from the opulent memorial he had envisioned. Instead, he was laid to rest in a simple vault, next to the woman he had loved the most. Henry VIII's burial vault did not remain undisturbed over the centuries. In fact, it was opened several times, and the events that took place during these disturbances are both surprising and tragic. The first major disturbance occurred in 1649, over a century after Henry's death, when King Charles IV was executed during the English Civil War. After his beheading, Charles I's supporters wanted to bury him in a quiet and secure location, away from the public eye. They chose Henry's vault in St. George's Chapel, as it was relatively unknown and unlikely to attract attention. However, when Charles's coffin was placed inside, workers had to move Henry's coffin to make room. It is believed that this caused significant damage to Henry's wooden coffin. Another disturbance occurred in 1813, when workers were doing renovations inside St. George's Chapel. They opened the vault to examine the condition of the royal coffins and found that Henry's coffin was in poor shape. The wood had rotted, and parts of Henry's remains were exposed. Despite this discovery, no effort was made to repair or replace the coffin, and Henry's remains were left in their damaged state. Today, Henry VIII's resting place is marked by a simple marble slab in St. George's Chapel. The inscription on the slab reads, "In a vault beneath this marble slab are deposited the remains of Jane Seymour, Queen of King Henry VIII, 1537, King Henry VIII, 1547, King Charles I, 1648, and an infant child of Queen Anne." This slab, placed there by King William IV in 1837, is a far cry from the grand tomb Henry had planned for himself. For a king who lived such a dramatic and powerful life, his final resting place is surprisingly modest. Visitors to Windsor Castle today can easily walk past the marble slab without realizing that it marks the burial site of one of England's most famous kings. There is no grand monument or ornate tomb to draw attention to Henry's resting place, just a simple stone marking the spot where he lies. In the end, Henry VIII's burial serves as a reminder that even the most powerful rulers cannot control what happens after they die. Despite his larger-than-life legacy, Henry's final resting place is a simple one, far from the grand monument he once dreamed of. I hope you enjoyed this video. Do subscribe to our channel Medieval Mind for more videos like this.